Welcome back, map makers. This is another trigger tutorial, this time on events. Consider the situation in front of you. You've got yourself 6 old men and some shop items. When the old man moves to a unit, you want it to spawn in front of the temple for the unit type that you have chosen. So if I move the old man in front of the Anubite, it will spawn in front of the blue temple because it is the blue one. If I move the Minotaur, then it should spawn a Minotaur in front of my temple. But if, say, player 3 moved in front of the Minotaur, it should spawn in front of player 3's temple, and so on and so forth. Let's have a look at what we have so far. In the triggers, I have got the usual initialization with the trigger loader. And on setup, I decided to be lazy with diplomacy and have it done by triggers, by nesting to for loops, rather than having to open the diplomacy window and clicking all the boxes. I just thought I'd show off a little example of having a nested for loop. So we've got a for 1 to 6 on P, and then from Q equal to the value of P plus 1 up to 6, and I set P and Q ally with each other both ways. And that will cover all cases of each player being matched against everyone else because it is neutral. And Q will always be a greater value than P. So there won't be any repeats. Outside of the loop, I've just set Mother Nature to be ally, so we don't have any nonsense of these units attacking the old men. Given the old men a bit of speed, and I've given them the line of sight so we can see the whole map. Now, I have created a trigger to set up the shop for one of the units for the old men. If I go to the triggers, you can see that it is a non-looping trigger because we're using a dynamic trigger. Dynamic trigger, I then declare it is a loop. As mentioned, you do it inside of here rather than on the outside. I do a check that an old man is near the Anubite, and I have a little short timer, and I've got this complicated if expressions here where I check that P is a certain value and then create in front of the temple based off what the value is. So I said if P equals 1, create here. If P equals 2, then create a player 2 one here, and so on and so forth. You could create as player P, but it doesn't make a vast amount of difference on there. Now, if I wanted to add this deploying for another unit, I would have to go through this whole if statement all over again, but deploying a Minotaur instead of an Anubite, and then in front of the same set of temples, and then if I did another unit, I'd have to copy it again, and that is very repetitive. What if I wanted to move where the temples were? I've got to update all of the locations. If I want to change the units, I have to update them all. If I want to change the number of units, I have to update them all. As you can imagine, it gets a little bit heavy with doing all of the different updates on the units. So that's really annoying. So what if there was a way instead where we could do the logic once and then reuse it for all the shops, and then if we want to change the logic, then we just change it in one place rather than having everywhere do it. This is where events come in. Events allow for one trigger to act as some effects or code, or however you want to think about it, that can be run, called directly from another trigger at any time. And you can even pass over information. So a normal fire event, if you've used that allows one trigger to activate another trigger. But you can't give it any information about what to pass over in order to customize its effects. So imagine if you had a unit creation trigger and you wanted to reuse it and you were using fire event. Well, you have a problem because it wouldn't know which player to create the units for when it did the creation. But with events, that's all changed. Let's use an event to simplify this shop, and let's complete the shop for the other 2 units. So we're going to create a new trigger, and let's call it create unit handler. I'll put underscore just so the handler becomes clear afterwards. And for this, handlers, the way they work is you just define them once, they're not looping, and then once the handler exists, it can be triggered by any other trigger. The only catch is that the handler must have run before the thing that activates it. So if you've got something that activates this handler and it runs before the handler itself activates, it won't work. But that's not generally going to be a problem, because if you just run immediately the handler, that'll ensure that it gets done immediately before everything else. So we'll do active run immediately on the handler. We don't need any conditions for this because we're just going to define some sort of effects. And then we want to use the events thing. And on there we want to define an event handler. There are two versions. We're going to worry about the non-return version for now. So here you give it a name of an event, and we have some parameters that can be passed over. Now, if you remember my last video, you'll now know what the parameters are. Parameters are a way of transferring data across renders, but in this case, you can also use them to transfer data between triggers as well. So I'm going to call the name createUnit to be consistent. And we've got some parameters. Now, what would be useful parameters? Well, one parameter that would be useful is what unit to create. So let's say that the first string parameter is a unit one. So let's take our parameters, the first index, and let's call that unit. It would be nice if we had the count, sorry, not the count, sorry, the players. We'll do count at the moment. We'll get the, it'd be nice to have that. So let's call this variable p, as we like to do with player. And as I just mentioned, let's have a count one as well. So we're getting parameters. We're expecting one string, which is a unit, plus a player, plus a count. Now let's do our creation. So we'll do a unit create, and we'll need to probably use the multi on there. And we're going to need quite a few things relaxed for this to work. We're going to need the player relaxed, and we're also going to need the proto unit to be relaxed as well. And as an example, so here we're going to have our player. We want the unit. We'll just do P. We'll have our unit there. And we want to have our count. Now, I could do some clever stuff with storage where I store a location for each player, but for now I'm going to just going to reuse that if statement system that we had before that I showed just to do the areas. So if I just duplicate that and do if and variable int is value p equals 1, then we're going to deploy in this first location, and I will do if end, and then quickly duplicate that for the other players. So player 2 deploy here, player 3 deploy here, player 4 we want to send it here, player 5 we want to put here, and finally player 6 we want to go here. Well, as you saw, that was quite tedious, but that is the only time we're going to need to do this, because we're going to be able to reuse it for all the shops. Now, like all the other landers, we need to end this. So let's do end. There we go. Events handler end. There we go. So to recap, at the moment we've got the create unit, which I'll just copy so we can use the name. We get our string from the first string parameter. We get our int for the first int parameter as our player. We get the count as our second parameter. We do some checks on the player, and we deploy based on which player it is. And we repeat that until the end. Now, let's go and adapt our first shop to make use of this event. If we go to our conditions, we don't really need to change anything here because we just loop over each player and we check the position. Fine with that, nothing going on here. Then we get to our effects, and this is where the big tedious stuff is. Let's get rid of all this. So, as a reminder, what we're going to need to do, we're going to need to create the parameters with what we had before. But for the data we're going to pass over. So let's just create our parameters. Create, and we might as well use the create with string because we've got a string in there and only one of them. And we're going to create that with the unit. So in our case, it is the annoyance. And we're going to need to add the int parameters. So let's add those in. We can use the non-empty ints as a little minor shortcut. The first one we want as the player, and the second one we want the count. So let's just set that to 1. We'll just move that up. And finally, we want to fire our event off so that the create unit handler sees the event and handles it, creating our unit. So let's do that. Events, and let's fire. And we want to fire with our parameters. So events fire parameters. And that will fire the event with our parameters that have just created. So we created the parameters, we added it with annoyance, we added the player and the count, and we're firing the event off. You'll see that there are a few other options for the events firing. You can see that there are some ints and floats and stuff. That's just if you want to fire an event without having to create a parameters object. You can just fire it with a single float or a single int directly, rather than having to worry about that. But let's give this a run. Okay, let's move our old man down to the annoyance.
Ναι. Μάλιστα. Βούλομαι.
Nothing happened. Let's just have a quick look and just see if there's an obvious mistake I have done. It is probably something really dumb, like I haven't matched up the events properly. That's probably what's happened. I'll just have a quick check. Fire. Yes, I didn't name the event correctly. If you fire an event that doesn't have a handler, nothing happens. Similarly, if you have multiple event handlers for the same event, all of them will fire. So you've got to make sure that the event names match up, otherwise things will not work properly. Let's just give that a try.
Έτοιμος. Έστω.
And here we go. So we have our annoyances deploying from our shop.
Μάλιστα.
And I'll just quickly launch this as another player so you can see that it is not just for player 1. Let's say player... I'll use this one because it's still got that bug. Let's do player 4.
Πρόσταγμα. Έστω. Μάλιστα.
Move him over. And there we go. We have player 4.
Βούλομαι.
Now, let's finish up with the other items. And hopefully you'll see that doing the other items is now pretty trivial. Well, let's do it. Let's duplicate this, and we'll call this shop Minotaur. Because who doesn't want to create some Minotaurs in Age of Mythology, especially me? We'll center the new object and go to the effects. Well, the only thing that's changing is the Minotaur, is which unit we're doing. So let's do Minotaur. That's it. The rest of the parameters are the same, and the rest of the logic's the same. There we go. Shop number 2 done. Let's just move this up to make it cluster these together, and let's do our third shop. We'll do that lampades, and yeah, we just need to change which unit we're looking at, which is this one, and well, we need to change this to lampades. I notice I've typed Minotaur wrong in the last one, so I'll correct that in a second. I lost the quote on the end. Let's go and correct that. That's one thing you do have to be careful of with this, is you do need to have your quotes in, because they're strings. Right, let's give this a run. Let's just do a different player, just for a bit of mixing and matching, and show that there's nothing special with player 1 or player 4. Okay.
Πρόσεχε.
Player 3. Let's
Μάλιστα.
go and have a lampades. There we go.
Ναι.
Lampades are
Έστω.
spawned.
Μάλιστα.
We've got our minotaurs.
Βούλομαι. Έστω. Ναι.
And we've got our antibites.
Έστω.
Hardly took any extra work, and yet, as you saw there, we've got an extra shop. So, there you go. Kind of a nice little shortcut there. And let's say you wanted to change the logic a little bit. You can. I want to change the number of antibites spawned. Well, let's just go in here and now make it 3. Change this parameter there, and let's run it up.
Έτοιμο. Μάλιστα. Βούλομαι.
There we go. We get 3 antibites at a time now
Ναι.
instead. So hopefully from all this you should be able to see the value of the event handler. We use the event handler to take some logic, often logic that's quite annoying to do all the work in one place, and then we can reuse all the work that we've done in another trigger by simply firing it and having our handler handle the event. As mentioned, you don't want the handler itself to be on loop. You add the handler once, and after that the handler will get triggered every time you fire an event with that name. Obviously, make sure the parameters are consistent. So if you create one int parameter, don't try and get 2 int parameters out, because obviously one of them won't exist. So do take some care with that. But otherwise, yeah, you hopefully can see that there are some massive time savings that can be made with this system. Now, hopefully I have not scared you too much, because I'm now going to show a much more advanced example. If you find this advanced example too much to follow, don't worry, you can just stick with the basics. But let's check it out. Okay, we'll just load this up. And here we go. This is the Wonder Duel scenario. Here, you'll have the ability to activate techs, units, and god powers from your Wonder onto the battlefield and battle it out. I have made use of events to speed things up, and let's have a check out on it. But let's play the scenario first to see what's going on, because I think it'll be easier to see visually before we have a look into a deep dive. If we click our Wonder, you'll see that there are 3 different things. We've got the bronze, which we can purchase. We've got the Minotaur, which we can buy and it will spawn some nearby. Obviously, you probably just make it train, but for the example, that's what we're going to do. And then we've got a speed upgrade, so we can speed up the Minotaurs. And we can stack these. And you can even, with the ability to auto-queue on, you can even auto-queue the upgrade. Whee! Now, let's go over how it all works using events. If we go into our triggers, I've created a few groups of triggers just to make things a little bit clearer. So to start with, let's have a look at the trigger loader. The trigger loader is the trigger loader. We've seen it lots of times. It's the first trigger you created and it doesn't need to do anything. It's just there. Initialize stats, not too much going on here. I just simply put I put a revealer here, and I've put revealer all to have more line of sight so we can just see the whole map. I've gone through the players and I've removed all the god powers for the players, so we've got a nice clean slate for our map. So all in all, not too bad. Now let's have a look at the shop parts. I've split this up into 4 parts. We've got the shop god powers, which is where the god power related stuff is. One for upgrades and one for spawn. Let's have a look at the utility section, which covers where the work is being done. The other areas are more the declarations of what we want. So first of all, let's have a look at the define item handler, and in there we've got a handler for the event define item, and we get some parameters, and from there we said that we prepare the shop unit, and we have the and then we also prepare the shop activate. Now you might think to yourself, okay, what are we trying to achieve overall to get this to work? Well, in short, we do the following. The Wonder itself has units that we are training, as you saw in the game. When those units train, as you saw, the event that we had occurred. So if we trained the bronze unit, then you saw that we had a bronze appeared. Now, obviously, there is no such thing as a bronze unit, and there is no such thing as a speed unit, or well, there is a Minotaur unit, but not the type that we're doing here, where it spawns 3 of them like that. So, what is going on? Well, I create a unit. There is a unit that is used, but you don't see this unit. That is what the prepare unit is for. So with the shop proto unit, I set up an object that we use as a placeholder for our event. And typically I use the in-game plants, that's the bushes and the shrubs. So example are these plants here. So you've got the grass, weeds and shrubs. And you might say, well, these are on the map. Isn't that going to be a problem? Well, yes, they are on the map. But they're only ever on the map as Gaia. There's never really going to be a good reason why you would want a bush of a player 1 or a grass of player 2. So because of that, we can make use of that as those players as our placeholders. And the nice thing is that these objects are all very consistent and very simple. So we don't need to worry about weird animations or side effects or any other strangeness going on. So let's have a look at the prepare proto unit. So in the proto unit, you'll see that there is a lot of declares starting, and that is because of all the information that we're passing over. So let's have a look. We've got a string which represents the unit, quite straightforward. We've got a name. Now, the name is going to be used for what we're going to name our unit that we see. So in the case of bronze, for example, this would be called bronze. We've got a description, which is displayed, that we're going to use as our hover over description. And finally, we've got an icon. The icon is used to show what is the picture of the object is. If I go on to the ints, we're going to have the row. This is the row of the grid that you see in the UI that we want to display the object on. Similarly, we've got a column, And finally, we can define a cost for the object. So each of the objects that we could have bought had a cost associated with it. We want that cost to be what is required to build it, and we want the appropriate amount subtracted from our total when we buy it. So once we've grabbed all the data, we then need to apply it onto and prepare our object. So through that, we're going to have a for loop, which goes through each player in turn. Hopefully this is something you're familiar with now. And we're going to set a couple of flags. So the first flag, I set the only in editor, and you can see that I do it with player P, and I'm using the unit parameter that we got out of the event parameters. And what the only in editor flag does is when you're not in the editor, it makes the unit not appear at all. It makes it invisible, which in the middle of the game is always going to be the case. So another way to think of this flag is, do you want the object to be invisible? Well, yes, we don't want bushes appearing while this stuff is spawning. So that's what we create. Our second flag is we turn off the force to nature. So under normal circumstances, if you place one of these grasses or brushes or such, it will convert to Mother Nature anyway, which obviously is not helpful because if it does that, we're not going to know which player it is when they create them. So we need to turn this flag off for it to work. In order to make a unit trainable, it needs to have training points, and bushes don't have any train points. So if you simply had the unit available, it wouldn't work. This is just something with the way the game works. So you have to give it some train points. I've given it 1, but you can give it like 0.1 if you want it pretty much instantly. Obviously, we need to enable us to build the unit, so this is where we enable it. And we need to add the unit to the UI of the wonder. So we have the wonder of the player, and we've got the unit which we're using, which would be the bush, and then we can set our row and column to have the position in there. Here we're going to give the unit a cost in gold. Bushes and other objects are free by default, so it's quite straightforward. You just add the cost of what you want it to be. So here we've said that the unit's going to cost some gold of player P, and we're going to say it's the cost. And we said that the amount that's going to cost is the cost variable, which we got from the parameters, and we're going to assign it to that cost. We've got the change name. The change name is how we're going to customize the look of the unit. So here I'm using the name parameter, the description parameter to act as a rollover, and then there's a short rollover as well. One of them is the rollover you see when you hover in the UI. The other one is if you hover over in the map. Obviously, you're never going to see the unit, although I've just set the description on it anyway. But yeah, that one doesn't really matter. Finally, we've got the icon of the unit. So I said use the icon parameter, and there is no minimap icon because there's no point setting it. It's not going to see it. And that's the end of our for loop and the end of our handler. So with this trigger, we can now turn any grass or shrub object into one that is suitable for a shop by simply firing an event with the appropriate data here. Let's have a look at one of those as an example. So if we go to the God Powers, we go to our shop bronze, here we're creating the shop parameters, and I'm using the non-empty strings. And you can see that we've added that it's a Greek plant bush that's activating a bronze. I've put the description to be grants a bronze god power, pretty straightforward. And I've put the icon in there as well. If we go to the ints, we've got our shop parameters. So I've said it's the 0th row, which is the first row, and the 0th column, which is the first column. And our third parameter was a cost, which we've given it 10. And then finally, we define the item and call through with our parameters. I'll come back to the bits below what that's for in a moment. And that is similar for the other upgrades as well. So for the speed upgrade, got a similar thing, using a different object, different names, different stats. If I go back to the utility and back to define, that was our first part. The second part is the activation. Now, with the activation, the way we're going to use this is, if you remember the tutorial on the unit creation handler, this allowed you to find objects that were created in the game and react to them. And so the idea is going to be that we're going to use that system and add a unit creation handler. We're going to check that it is the correct unit, and we're then going to activate the shop item if it is, and delete the object that we just had detected being created, because we don't want bushes just piling up by the wonder as we create them. So let's have a look at that. So similarly, we got a event handler where we are checking our event. We're going to add a unit creation handler, as we talked about, and we're going to start with we're going to have the unit ID parameter. We're using the parameters version. If you remember the last video, you can't pass variables directly into a lander, but you can using the parameters. But our data already was a parameter, so it's actually quite straightforward. We just simply use the unit created handler with the parameters version and just reuse the parameters that we've already got. So that's nice. Nice little shortcut there. From there, we're going to grab out our unit, since we need to know what it is that's being created. We've got our condition. So here we are going to check that the unit is the item that activates our shop. So in the case of our bronze, it was that bush. So if it is a bush, we want the shop item to activate, otherwise we want to ignore it. Inside there, we can grab hold of the name parameter. Could have done it earlier, but I've done it inside of here instead. And that is so that there's a couple of things we're going to use the name for. So first of all, I'm going to display a message, which I've got here, showing that that item has been purchased. But I'm also going to use the name as an event name. And you might go, okay, why is there an event? Why do we want to fire an event with the name? Well, what we want really, if we go back to our shop, ideally we want to declare what the shop is and what the shop does in the same place. Really, we can do it in two separate places, but it's kind of nice if you just gather it up in one place and do it all together. So that's what is going on here. I am having an event handler which takes the name of the event as the handler and will get fired. So what I mean by that is we've defined the shop, which is the bronze. We've added the parameters. We've defined our unit. Afterwards, we're creating an event handler to listen for the event that matches the name. Now, in order to save having to type the name and making mistakes, I actually just grab what the name is out of the shop parameters into a local variable of name, and then do an event handler with the name of our variable, which is name. This means that if we make multiple of these, we don't have to keep changing the event name. We can just keep the same code. If I go back to the shop utilities on there, we are going to create a new parameters. And you might say, okay, why are we creating a new one? Well, we need to when we fire off the event, we need to know which player it is we're firing for in order to do it. What I mean by that is, if we are defining a bronze god power, when the bronze activates, we need to know which player the bronze is for. So if I go back to the activate handler, that's what we do. So here we grab what the owner of the bush is. in our event handler. So we've done the event handling above here. We've grabbed the object. We've checked that it is a bush. And here we're going to grab the player of the bush so that we can fire for the correct player. So then we're saying fire the event with the name. And then the place that defined the shop will then handle that and do what the shop item does. Once that's done, I've thrown in a purchase message, which simply sends a message to the player to say that they've bought the item. And then I get rid of the bush by using the unit remove. Finally, I've got to end our if statement. I've got to end our creation handler. And I've got to end our event handler. Let's have a look at what I'm doing for the bronze god power with this system. So, as mentioned, we've created the event. We have put our parameters in. We fire it. It goes off to the unit define handler. The unit define will then add a handler listening for when bushes are created. When the bush is created of the right type, it will then call back to it will trigger our event handler here with the player as the parameter, because that's what we fired it as. And so we're going to grab the player out of the handler and then grant the god power to that player. And that's it. So let's just remind ourselves of what's going on. So the first trigger defined the item being the underlying unit, which is the bush. We've renamed the unit to bronze. And you can see there's a description that says grant a bronze god power. You can see that there's a cost involved with that. We have 1 second of training time, which you can see on the training. And then the bush gets created. The unit creation handler sees the bush, destroys it, and then fires back to our bronze trigger that a bronze has should activate. That trigger says, okay, there was a bush of player 1, and because it was owned by player 1, I should grant a bronze to player 1. And here is our bronze. And so you might say to yourself, okay, how do I use this system to create another item? Well, let's give that a go. If we go on to the shop god units, let's just do another unit 1. So we have a Minotaur 1. Let's say instead that we want a Cyclops. So we can duplicate the Minotaur 1 and we'll change this to Cyclops. And let's go into the effects. So in here, we've got our shop parameters. We need a different object on here because at the moment we've got bush, so let's change that to weeds. Let's be generous and have 5 Cyclopses because we know Minotaurs are superior, so we have to give more Cyclopses to make up for it. And we'll say spawn 5 Cyclopses. Or 5 Cyclops. And then we want to change our icon. Hopefully it's just Cyclops. Icon. Although otherwise you would need to look it up. Yeb has recently posted up a PDF of all the icons in there, and you can also use the resource viewer if you've got that to view what the icons are. But I'm hoping that is the correct name for it. We'll see. If not, we'll just see a blank icon. Let's go to our ints. So we've said that it's going to be on. That it was on the second row, row 1, which is the second row. We want to leave on that, but we're going to need it on another column because there's already an icon there. So let's do that. And let's make them cost 8 gold instead of 10. And then we define our item with the parameters we created, so nothing changes there. We grab the name parameter out, as our event handler. We don't need to change that. And we add a handler for that name, which we also don't need to change. We grab hold of the integer, which is the player, and we create a Minotaur, which needs to change to Cyclops. And this is another handler to creation, which I haven't gone over yet. So I've got a spawn units handler, which we can have a look at the moment. And the spawn units handler takes the object to spawn and the player and the number. You might see this looks very familiar. So we're just going to tweak the parameters slightly to do our object, because it's going to be Cyclops instead. And we're going to end the parameters and end the handler. Before we start, let's just have a quick look at what the spawn units handler does. This should look very familiar to you because we just covered it in our other video. We grab the unit, we grab the player, we grab the count, and we check if it is a certain player, and we create depending on which of the player it is. I've even set the headings as well. Let's have a look and see if I have done this correctly. Okay, we've got our two wonders. We haven't got it quite correctly. We've got, well, the icon's not right, but you can see that the unit is there and is in a different column. I must put the wrong column in, but let's train it anyway. Everything else is working fine. I must just have the wrong name of the icon. But that's no big deal. Not something that is a problem. So we just go back and just have a check over, remind ourselves what we did. So if I go back to the shop spawn, we had our object we created we've got our modifications on there. We've got parameters. So yes, I did put the wrong column. It should be column 1, not column 2, because it's index 0 index based. But otherwise, yeah, everything else is the same. I'll do a quick example. Oh, I didn't show the upgrade one. Let's have a quick look at how the upgrade works, because that's the only one we haven't looked at. The upgrade one's quite straightforward. For the handler, this bit at the start is the same. It's just stats and made a cost, quite expensive actually, 30 gold in this case. And calls through, grabs out, adds a handler, grabs the player out, and it's interesting. It's got the different name to what I've done. I must have typed in the box by accident and renamed it. But it's modify data relaxed, and here I said that all units should have 1 extra speed in their speed upgrade. So yeah, let's have a quick example again. Let's do another god power. Let's do a lightning storm, because who doesn't like one of those? No doubt I will not know what the correct name of the icons are, but as I say, this is something you can find out quite easily in externally. So here we are. We've got our Greek one instead of Egyptian, so let's do weeds again. It is not a bronze, so let's do a lightning storm. We've got grants a lightning storm god power. And this is probably almost certainly going to be wrong. It's probably not lightning storm. As I say, I'm not going to worry about it. It's something you can look up properly when you're doing this. We will create it on, it's on the 0th row, so let's create it in the new column. And these bits are the same. We've got a handler. Grab our player out as always, and here we just need to change what the god power is from bronze to lightning storm. There we go. And that's it. Everything else is taken care of. As long as I haven't mistyped something. Let's give this a look. And yep, didn't get the right icon name, but it doesn't matter. You can see that I have named it a lightning storm. It costs 10 gold because it didn't change the cost in the end, and it grants a lightning storm god power. And here we go. Here's our lightning storm. Ooh. So that covers the events. I have gone over a straightforward example where I used it to quickly do the shop icons, and I've gone over a more complex example where I've built an engine which allows you to have god powers happen, have stats occur, we've got units creating, and we've got handlers to do that, and we've got a relatively minimal set of triggers effects in order to achieve each item. You can see that other than me not knowing what the name of the icons are, it is very easy to create a new item with this system without a lot of work, and so you can quickly fill up the line. There's probably plenty of shortcuts that you could take to make things even quicker than what I've done, which I'm sure you'll figure out. If you wanted to take this system and modify it a little bit, so an example of something you might want to do is we covered here having a building have icons, and when the building creates the object, then just something happens. But instead, you might want to consider where you've got a unit and you want to give the unit abilities. Then this system can be used similarly. You might think, okay, how would I make an effect happen at a player? Well, one way would be to store that position of the player and then grab it out of storage when you do your effect and apply the effect at that location. So you would, let's say you had a Circe hero for each player and you wanted the Circe's ability to be used, then what you could do is have a looping trigger that loops through and stores the position of the Circe unit into storage. And then when your shop activates, what you can do is grab the position of that player from storage and then activate the effect at that position. There's a video I've already done covering the getting and setting of storage, but that is an example of one way you can do it. There are probably plenty of other ways of doing similar, but that's just an example. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated for you to follow. If it was, well, you've got the simple example, hopefully, and if it's still too much, don't worry too much. Events are quite an advanced thing for people who want to do quite complicated maps and just want to save a little bit of time. I hope this was very useful and learned a lot, and look forward to seeing you in the next video. Goodbye.